So we will get started. Welcome to CMC's Sunday Dharma Talk. Today's talk is the Heart of Chan, Exploring Mind via the Prajna Paramita, Mahaprajna Paramita, given by Gilbert. And today is actually the last lecture of the series given by Gilbert. And just to make a quick announcement, if you want to continue studying from Gilbert and listening to his Dharma talk, he will be starting a new lecture on a different sutra, and that's actually going to be on Monday class. So that starts at 9:30 Eastern time every Monday. And we will be posting the Zoom link on the chat at the end of the class or at the end of the class. Also, you are all invited to write a reflection, a report on these Dharma lectures. And you can send it to CMC web email, which I will be posting at the end of the lecture too. So now, without further ado, I will transfer this to Gilbert. We will first recite the Four Great Vows.
Vow. The Four Great Vows. I vow to deliver innumerable sentient beings. I vow to cut off endless vexations. I vow to master limitless approaches to Dharma. I vow to attain supreme Buddhahood. Before we start, I'd like to thank the Chan Meditation Center and Angela for being my, assistant in setting this up and monitoring everything that's going on in this particular lecture. Changhua for inviting me to speak. It's very difficult in four sections to try to speak about Mahayana and the spirit of it as it is in terms of our practice. As I've indicated before, what I've tried to do is give you a historical perspective, a doctrinal perspective, and a practice perspective in terms of how we practice what is Chan. And in this way of saying what is Chan, we have to really look and see that the word is derivative from the word dhyana, and meaning to practice. From the very beginning, as I've mentioned before, Mahayana was an action word. And it was a word saying that this is the highest practice, and which required effort. This is the same as the particular qualities of Samantabhadra, in which Samantabhadra, Pusha and Pusa is about action. And it's very interesting because when we study the practice, because another important element of our practice is sunyata, emptiness, but there is a word called sunya or suna, in the scriptures. And there is substantially more use of the word suna than sunyata, as sunyata being a noun, being something that we say, oh, that it's this. It's actually it implies that this is a doing, an action of something, an application of this emptiness in terms of how the mind sees things. So it's a repetitive that we look at the world from the eyes of Suna, the practice of looking at the world as being fundamentally empty. And the difficulty with this is because the word that we use, empty, especially in English, is one that means it's devoid of anything. And we can say in one way it's devoid, but it's in another way, such as I was reading about Thich Nhat Hanh, was talking about the interbeing of everything. And this interbeing is the emptiness that we're talking about. It's devoid because it is all part of the same ocean, the ocean being the ocean of mind. And when we practice the ocean of samadhi, what we're doing is we're connecting with mind, not connecting with the appearances and the phenomena. Those are ultimately seen as non-existent. But the mind being immutable, being that it is not something that arises, but it is what everything arises within, everything attributes its temporary existence to the very fact that is being projected upon the mind. And this is something that, in terms of the practice, and when we looked at it in the Huayan school would talk about Indra's net, this interconnection of these mirrors that reflected everything around it. And so if one mirror reflected something somewhere else, that would be also reflected because it's all interconnected. There was also a reference to it in the Hawaiian school to the like appearance of a hall of mirrors. And let me see if I can get that. That was Fasang that talked about this hall of mirrors, and trying to explain to the Empress Wu what this notion of mind is, of sunyata. And if you imagine a mirror here and a mirror here and mirrors all over, no matter where you look, what would you see? Think about this. What would you see if you have a mirrors all over, and and there would be infinite light? It'd be infinite, no matter where you'd see it, because I'm sure you've all had the experience of having a mirror behind you and a mirror in front of you, and all of a sudden you just see multiple images. Each image perfectly reflecting, each image has the mind there, which allows whatever reflections to be there, but the reflections are perfectly reflected in the mirror. So whatever is put there, it is perfectly reflected everywhere. So if you stamped your foot down here, it could be felt in all the different worlds, all the different universes. And this is something that the Buddha used to always make a point of. When sometimes when they walked, they would say that the earth would shake, because all of this is within the mind. And it gets us away from this idea that the mind is something that we need to understand via appearances. It is the appearances that keep us from understanding this. So today, right before I started the class, I kind of changed again what I was going to talk about, because I really try not to waste your time, and I try to point you in the right direction. And I realized that my lecture could go on for another 2 or 3, 4 hours, much less years. But I wanted to give you something and kind of incorporate and roll into what I had as my prepared lecture, which is the one that I was going to talk about from the very first day. I haven't gotten to it, but in fact, I have gotten to it because as we're beginning to explain this, we see how the influences were there, and in Mahayana, and the sinification, the Chinese influence um, um, was produced. And in that, we just talked about how Huayan approached things. And then from the Tian Tai school, all of these schools, they got their influence. And it seemed as though the Lotus Sutra was one that kind of spread everything in many different directions. And from that sutra, so many different uh, sects of Buddhism came. And so we have the Pure Land practice that came out, Tian Tai, Huayan school, and Chan. Now the Huayan school and Tian Tai school were more what they considered intellectual approaches, although they did have their aspect of meditation practice. And here, Chan and Huayan were freely interchanging ideas about what the practice is in terms of the meditative practices that were there. In fact, in the later time, and when there was a persecution against Buddhism, Tian Tai pretty much kind of fell off the face of the earth. Huayan was preserved in the practice of Chan, in many respects was absorbed by the school of Chan, because they're still Buddhist uh, doctrine, and they still fit with it. There may be some slight differences in terms of how one looks at it, but we're looking back in time at a time where somebody comes up and says, here, this book right here, look, this is sutra. It's very incredible. And they go, where'd you get that? Oh, I got it from somebody. Can I have a copy? Sure. You can make a copy. So they can make a copy, which when you ask for a copy in those days was quite a chore, because it had to be hand copied. And so there were centers of learnings, just as there were in India. And this is where the interpretation of these sutras emanated from. But if you only had one sutra, then everybody's going to use the same sutra and interpret it in different ways. Why? Because Buddhism is in this way. There's a free expression of this, and there is a constant um, uh, examination of it from the different viewpoints and different people in terms of this, in terms of how they interpret this. But nevertheless, the essence of Buddhism is still there. Although there were many schools of even Chan, but the essence of it was still there. And this is what's important in terms of how we look at it, because we can't just simply sit back and say, this is what the Buddha taught, we're not going any farther with it. No, it's all clear here. Rather, I don't think that this is the way that the Buddha wanted to explain things and say, okay, I'm going to lay this out, and this is where it all is. As I'd mentioned in an earlier class, after the Buddha's realizations and enlightenment, he was trying to figure out how he was going to explain this. This is not easy to explain at all. And understanding that it is beyond words. This is something that's very difficult for us to understand. And so in this, when we begin to practice in the right way, then we begin to see that this does fit. But in all of this, what we're doing is we're examining the sutras, and then we compare them. We have a very great opportunity here, even though they say this is the Dharma ending age. It can't, it doesn't have to be this way, because we have the ability via the internet to access sutras that the ancients didn't have. Maybe they had one or 2 sutras, 3 sutras in some great learning, or in the palace, they could have many, many sutras that are there. But by and large, if you had a sutra, it was incredibly precious. And you'd read it and read it and read it and reread it, just like we read the Heart Sutra, and we read it many times. And even reading it many times, all of a sudden we have these aha moments with the Heart Sutra where we see it from a different perspective. And then we begin to see it historically and doctrinally, what was being said, all of these things that are there. And this was the environment in which Chan came in onto the scene, because it was there. Buddhism came in very early, in the first century CE, into China. There were some efforts with the Hinayana or Theravadan to come in, but they died out. But because of the Silk Road transmission, there was a steady influence of Buddhist text. And I can't say it's like it was printed out, a bunch of times. It wasn't in that way. There was no print, but copies of it began to come in, and people would translate it. And this was very important in terms of this. So someone would get it. It would be like somebody getting a copy of something that was written in a different language, and then said, "This is very, very incredible." Some novel or book or whatever, and then you said, "This is really something." This is amazing. And so when they began to get it, what happened was, because of the background in China from Taoism and Confucianism, there was an acceptability and an interest in going, these people have a different way, a different philosophy about this. And this philosophy tweaked the Taoism and Confucianism, and where they were looking for the perfect man or the immortality. And all of a sudden, the Buddha speaking to everyone, and the possibility of some form of salvation that was universal, and understanding it. And it really piqued the interest of Chinese at that time coming in. It was when I say at that time, it came in at a very slow pace from the first century all the way till some of the more major sutras began to appear in the 5th century. And so this is something that we begin to see now, understanding when the sutras coming in the 5th century, those sutras may have been written 700 years before, and but they're just barely trickling in. But it gave the Chinese a chance to digest what was coming through, and and in this coming through, they began to see certain veins of commonality in terms of the doctrine, irregardless of whichever doctrine they or any sutra they read. They saw that there was something that was connected there. And so they started pulling all of these components out of it. And this is what, as a quote unquote teacher does now, is that we see a sutra, Lankavatara Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, whatever sutra that we see, and we find this common ground, and we go, aha, look, there it is again. There's this, there's that. And then you begin to interpret that. And this is why in the Mahayana Sutras, there was this notion of Pulya, which meant that these particular sutras were so deep and profound that they incorporated all of the fundamental training of the Buddhist doctrine, in particular Mahayana, excuse me, Mahayana doctrine, but they incorporated it all. They may have been talking about different things, but this is important for us to at least doctrinally understand how to approach the uh, the the sutras and study them. And we study them not in the vacuum of just one sutra, the Heart Sutra or the Lotus or the Lankavatara Sutra, Vatamsaka Sutra, Diamond Sutra, the Mahaprajna Paramita Sutras. All of those sutras are interconnected, just like interbeing. The interbeing in it is the fundamental principles of the school, beyond what is accepted. So what is accepted in the schools, irregardless of whether they're Theravadan or Mahayana, is the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the Paramitas, whether they're 6 Paramitas or 10 Paramitas, uh, all of these things that are there, the precepts. Those are things that we universally accept as Buddhists. And then we take from there and begin to look at this, and we were going, this Four Noble Truths seems to be contradictory to what the Buddha said, because the Buddha was saying this and saying, well, but there is no suffering. Where is there suffering? There is no suffering. And when we look at things in this way, we have to adjust in accordance with the Buddha's teachings. And so there is a progression there of study. And when we're attuned to these very, very profound interpretations of it, then we begin to write, we begin to have commentary, we begin to have treatises which look at this and say, this is what this means, at least to me. And you have to be truthful about it. You can't just make up stuff, but you try to look at it and say, this is what it means to me. And then you see here in this particular passage, this is in a similar vein. And here in this sutra, they talk about this. So this is what I want to impart to you, is how to study Mahayana, how to study the Chan school. And so we're going to go over a little bit of that, although I spent a third of the time already in the preface to what I was going to do. But we're going to talk about some of the things here. And as I had mentioned, that when the Buddha came out of I don't think he came out of it. I think after his enlightenment, he was trying to figure out how to present this, understanding there are certain fundamental principles, and this is what the schools began to extract from the teachings. One of the most important ones was the idea of a single vehicle, ekayana, and in ekayana, this permeated the understanding in the Chan school. Now, a lot of people think because that said that it's beyond words and phrases, that one doesn't have to study. One just has to experience or have this gnosis. But the only way to have the gnosis is to be fundamentally prepared to experience it. Otherwise, one can be confused. It is why a Pratika Buddha cannot have a full realization, simply because they lack the fundamentals of the doctrine that's there. So the Chan school, it was not one that just simply people were just sitting on a cushion making their bottoms flat. There was a study of this in terms of knowing what to do. So simply just to have a school to do that would be just like to say, okay, well, we're going to open up an exercise school and then we'll become enlightened. That could not work that way, because all you're learning is how to sit. But you're not learning the fundamentals of it. So this Ekayana, I wanted to give you an example, and this is 8th century, and it was a disciple, I think, of Matsu, Huang Po. And so this is probably 2 generations after Hui Ning, the last patriarch. But you'll see in his writing that, or his explanations, are the fundamentals of the school. And so, let me see. He was asked, what is the Buddha? The answer was, your mind is the Buddha. The Buddha is mind. The mind and the Buddha is indivisible. Therefore, it is written, that which is mind is Buddha. And if there is other than mind, it is certainly other than the Buddha. But in other words, they're explaining this in terms of saying that everything is ekkanayana, the single vehicle, which is the mind. And so all of the Chan school always talked about this as what is the substance of mind. Mind is a substance of mind. What is the primary meaning of mind? Mind is the primary meaning. And we're looking for the meaning in the samsaric existence. We want to say, there must be some value to Gilbert. And, and as I look at myself, and I'm going like, comparing myself to a banana at this stage in my life, I'm a little more squishier, a little bit darker here and there, have definitely a stronger smell than I was when I was younger. I cannot gauge and put any importance on this body. But the mind that I've used since I drew my first breath, that's not different. That has never aged. It is acquired information during this lifetime, but that mind has not aged at all. That which enabled this body to come into this illusory world, that's never changed. We continue. If our own mind is the Buddha, how did the Bodhidharma transmit his doctrine when he came to India? They say, well, what could he teach? When he came from India, he transmitted only mind Buddha. He just pointed to the truth that the minds of all of you have from the very first been identical with the Buddha, and there is no separate way from each other. That is why we call him the patriarch. Whoever has the instant understanding of this truth suddenly transcends the whole hierarchy of saints and adepts belonging to the 3 vehicles. You've always been at one with the Buddha, so do not pretend that you can attain this oneness by various practices. And again, this is very much important because this goes to the idea of that we have this Buddha nature. And in this Buddha nature, that we all possess, this was said here very easily, but it required centuries of hammering at, even before it came to China, hammering at to get to that point where we're talking about that, because this was closer to the end product, which is the Tathagata Garbha and the Tathagata Garbha, and talking about Buddha nature. And so when we talked about Buddha nature, then what we're doing is we're looking at fundamentally that everything is mind. This one vehicle is there. The self nature of mind is actually, there's no self there. That is the self nature of mind. What drives it? Pratika Samapada. Causes and conditions never fail. Next question. If that is so, what Dharma do all Buddhas teach when they manifest themselves in the world? So what is the Dharma that the Buddhas are teaching? And if this is very interesting to you, I highly recommend you join my Monday night class, because these questions are asked directly to the Buddha. And we're going to study the teachings of the child inconceivable radiance. Very incredible sutra. And you will have the Buddha being asked these questions directly. So his response is, when all the Buddhas manifest themselves in the world, they reclaim nothing but one mind. Thus, Gautama Buddha silently transmitted to Mahakasyapa the doctrine of one mind. So here, this is very interesting because we're going back into the very beginning stages of Buddha's teachings. And here we have the story of the Buddha, they're twirling a flower, and Mahakasyapa just acknowledging it and seeing it via mind and understanding exactly where that flower is appearing, what the Buddha's doing, how this is working, and for eons, what this training is that goes into the future and also is rooted in the past. There's no past, present, and future. In that moment, it is completely fused with this single mind that they share. And there's a transcendence there of the idea of phenomena, which takes us back to the Huayan school and the Tiantai school of noumenon and phenomena. And it's happening in a snap of a finger. Boom, it's there. But it's only there for Mahakasyapa, only there for him. Everybody else is looking at it and going, why is the Buddha twirling a flower in his hand? I remember in my very first retreat, something very interesting that happened, that on the day of sharing it, and this would have been a Thursday night, and Master Shen Ying was seated in front of us cross-legged, and there was this bowl of M&Ms, big, kind of like a flat bowl of M&Ms that had a lot of M&Ms in it. The multicolored chocolate ones, and he was just looking at it, like, very interesting. I thought this to be very unusual for him to be so enthralled in looking at all of these M&Ms. I knew it was a lesson, and he was looking at them, and he was just touching them with the back of his index finger and letting them roll. And they'd bang into each other, and they'd roll this way and roll that way. And he would just be smiling and smiling and smiling. And finally, he just looked up and he just smiled at me. And I just nodded. I'm not Mahakasyapa, but I understood the importance of what he was doing, that it wasn't just him fooling around, that there was a lesson there. Gilbert, can you hear me? Or much more, I should say, testing, is this mind connected? This is something there. And this is the esoteric aspect of the practice, where there's just this silent, quiet smiling, and this quiet smiling back. It's like a mic check. Yes, I can hear you. And it was very interesting, because to me, I just looked at this as if arrayed before him were all these jewels, here represented by M&Ms, but all these jewels that were there, and he was rolling them and offering them to us. And we were free to pick up as many as we could. And this is the way I try to present the Dharma, in the same way, offering to you as much as I can. And there's an array of jewels, Dharma jewels here. Pick up as many as you can. If you pick them up, it doesn't matter, because no matter what, the more you pick up, the more will be arrayed in front of me. And and more for offering to others. But you will take them, and now you will offer them to other people. This is the big essence of our practice. This is karuna. Karuna. Maybe Angela can write that down. So it's Karuna. Thank you. Karuna is very interesting. And this term of karuna comes actually from the Abhidharma. And in the Abhidharma, the very term that was explained before it was metta, Metta. Metta meaning this loving kindness. But in this loving kindness, thank you, Angela, it's more than that. It's more than this. When we say metta, this loving kindness is a practice. It's something that we practice, that we incorporate into what we do. We don't have to say, "Oh, I'm doing this," and we do it in a very non-conditional way. It just is something. We don't give metta to somebody and withdraw it because they ignore us. We understand that there's causes and conditions that may appear that there was somebody that was ignoring us or somebody that was doing, but it has to do with many, many complex karmic forces coming in. But this loving kindness then brings forth this karuna. So even before we get to the Mahayana, there was already karuna, this interest, and it's defined, the Sanskrit word is an interest in the suffering of others. So in order to have an interest in the suffering of others, one must understand what suffering is. When we understand what suffering is, then we can lend assistance to remove that suffering. What do you think? Do you think that the bodhisattvas, they want to remove your suffering? It's kind of like the old Janis Joplin song. Most of you won't know it, but some of you will know it. It said, "Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? My friends all have Porsches. I must make amends." And this kind of like, please alleviate my material suffering, is not in this way. The suffering there that is thought to be removed is this ignorance, a fundamental ignorance. And this is what we really want to see, is this fundamental ignorance. Now, this fundamental ignorance was identified um, in the Queen Shamala Lion's Roar Sutra, very incredible sutra, and very, very interesting in terms of how all this comes up. And then tomorrow you'll see how even the Queen Shamala is connected with this sutra of this child of inconceivable radiance. Very interesting, because I've already talked about this, but it all fits in like a big family. So now we've heard about Huang Po. We've been delving into the idea of the esoteric and the exoteric. Exoteric meaning the sutras, and the esoteric is the understanding mind to mind. When we practice, we have to practice in meditation what they call wall gazing. If you gaze at a wall, what is there? What do you see? The same thing you saw an hour before, the same thing you saw 2 hours before. But if you're sitting there gazing at a wall, you're going, I'm bored. So you want to put something on that wall to see, to entertain yourself. It's like the kids of today, it's difficult for them to do anything that isn't connected electronically. And even to some of us, we're there with our cell phone all the time. Hey, hello, I'm here. Well, text me, would you? We don't engage in direct contact anymore. But in this practice, we sit and we use the concentration of samadhi to practice and have this continuous practice of contemplation and awareness. Let me get to that, see if I can find it. This is from the Lankavatara Sutra. Sorry for the reflection. But in this part, Mahatma once more asked the Buddha, Bhagavan, please tell us about the Buddha's awareness. Bhagavan, what constitutes the Buddha's awareness? I'm always telling you that when you're sitting to meditate, you have to have awareness. Don't have cogitation, have awareness. The Buddha told Mahatma, it consists of realizing that there is no self in beings or things, in understanding the two obstructions, which are passion and knowledge, in transcending the two kinds of death. The two kinds of death is the physical death and the other death, which is the death of the ignorance. And putting to the end of the two kinds of afflictions, which are that we have senses and that the senses give rise to appearances. So this is what is meant by the awareness of the Buddha. Those Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas capable of this are also called Buddhas. And then he says, this is the reason I teach the one path. So what is the one path? Ekayana, everything is mine. So this all goes back. Here's Lankavatara. I'm talking about what was being taught, but here in the Lankavatara, it's showing awareness. This is one path. What is the one path? When you sit to meditate, what you do is you just simply sit and you're contemplating. You're contemplating what? This moment, whatever is there, not attaching to it. You are completely different. So the term cogitation that was just up was thinking, this thought process. But here the Chinese use the term wunyan, no thought. Even engaged in thought, Hui Ning explained that no thought means not clinging to thought. So this is very, very important to us, that we don't cling to anything. And in the practice, we have this idea that we, in non-attachment, as we're sitting there, we sever this mind that desires this continuation, because it's a false illusion of consciousness. But in actuality, if we just simply sit, we discipline ourselves through Mahayana. We use the notion of virya, virya, which is great effort. Thank you. This term virya then is one in which, if we use it, then we apply it and we keep applying it. We don't just go to our cushion and say, oh, well, I'm going to practice, and then make it really something that is a half-hearted effort. Because pratika samapada, cause and condition never fail, you'll get a half-baked result. And I don't know if any of you have ever had the dubious pleasure of taking a cake out of the oven too soon. And it's unpalatable. You can't eat it because it looks really good. You touch the top and it's crispy, and then you put the knife in and it comes out with a bunch of doughy goo. it's not going to work. You have to sit, you have to apply this virya, this Mahayana, the supreme effort to practice. Remember this, emptiness is the practice. Sunna, S-U-N-N-A, is the adjective that's saying, or I think it's a verb, excuse me, saying that this is what you do. So you are, in everything that you see, you apply it. You apply emptiness to everything. And there is at that point then, in this constant application, a self-absorption. So this self has two meanings here. The self-absorption of the illusory self into the self-nature of mind, which is actually a no self. It is just simply mind. And this is how the Buddha had explained it. Let's see if I can get to that. Well, I want to read from Hongzhi. And so he was a little bit later, probably 200 years after the Huang Po, but still in the same line. And Hongzhi was really a great proponent of silent illumination. And then listen to what he's saying here and see if it doesn't fit with everything that went on since the Buddha walked out from underneath the Bodhi tree. The field of boundless emptiness is what exists from the very beginning. You must purify, cure, grind down, and brush away all the tendencies that you have fabricated into apparent habits. These tendencies are but clouds in our eyes. Then you can reside in the clear circle of brightness. Utter emptiness has no image. Upright independence does not rely on anything. Just expand and illuminate the original truth, unconcerned by external conditions. I have to stop here to explain how this applies to when you're sitting on the cushion. When you're sitting on the cushion, irregardless of whether you're doing recitation of the Buddha's name, Hua To, silent illumination, or some other one, counting the breath, you expand. You just allow the mind to expand. Don't try to keep it locked up here cerebrally, like in the brain. Let this awareness go, because the awareness is way beyond the cogitation of a brain. You cannot reach out and grab it, but absorbed into it, there's no place it's not. But that only comes with practice, and the correct practice is right view, that you allow yourself to do that, to expand out. You have no borders. It's infinite. When you set your mind in contemplation, this is the mind that is contemplated. It works. It really works, but you have to stay at it. Accordingly, we are told to realize not a single thing exists in this field. Birth and death do not appear. Deep source, transparent down to the bottom, can radiantly shine and respond unencumbered to each speck of dust without becoming its partner. This is very important. So you can respond to the things that are appearing without attaching to them. When I attach to anything, I become very bad. It could be attached to my idea of self, or a moment of anger or frustration or whatever. If I just let everything be and respond to it naturally in accordance with Pratika Samappada, then there's no suffering. And more importantly, I cause no suffering to others, which is to me much more important than whether I suffer. The subtlety of seeing and hearing transcends mere colors and sounds. The whole affair functions without leaving traces and mirrors without obscuration. Here, he's referring back to Indra's net, the Huayan school, and you see how the Huayan school is wrapped up in this. So now historically, you're beginning to see all of these subtle connections to the practices. It's very, very amazing when you see this, because you go, I know where this came from. I know what he's talking about. He's talking about Fazen's Hall of Mirrors. Very naturally, mind and the dharmas emerge and harmonize. So very natural. Everything that you see is in this way. It's very natural. And as it's natural, um, they the mind and the dharmas emerge and harmonize. What they're saying is that because this is mind, it is capable of appearing and 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 harmonizing with whatever is appearing in the samsaric realm. Why? Because it knows it's an illusion. It knows it's a dream. This is one of the most fundamental things that came out of from our early sutras, and especially in the sutras such as the Prajnaparamita Sutras and the Diamond Sutra, which is of that same class, of saying everything is like a cloud or an illusion. So we do not hold on to it. Why? Because it's clear. We cannot say that this moment I am infinite. No, Gilbert's not infinite. Mind is there. Mind which enables Gilbert to appear and enables Gilbert to speak to you is there. But the mind to mind has never been born. That is important. That heart that I wish to share with you, those M&Ms, I want to pass on to you. Pick them up. They're free. Share them. That is when it becomes karuna. It becomes metta. There's no difference between the Theravadan Buddhist Buddha and Mahayana Buddha. Everything is there. It's just subject to interpretations. But if I was to die and go in front of the Buddha and go, wow, you really exist. Look, you have all of the trappings of a Buddha. You must be the Buddha. He's not going to say, yeah, you really messed up. I don't think he would do that. He would say, I'll give you an A for effort, and whatever other grade. But it's something that we look at. We practice from our heart. This is Mahayana. This is what we do. Is there's so much I wish I could share with you, and I only have such a limited time in this fleeting world. The time goes by so quickly, and yet even in the middle of the night, my mind is working to present this this Dharma to you today, and to tweak it and change it, and hopefully that you feel it from the esoteric side, that there's something there to pass on. So when we look at the practice, we have the ekayana, the single vehicle. We talk about non-duality. There's no subject object, and this is very, very, very important, because as we had talked about in the Monday night class, where there was this Thai forest tradition master Mahabua, and he was explaining to his disciple and saying, there's this non-duality here at the very subtle aspects of where she was at. She still was retaining the idea of a life and being that was looking at all of this luminosity of the mind. And she mistook it for the mind itself. It was just simply as if there is an eclipse of the sun, and one sees all of the rays around the sun, and you're going, my gosh, this is very, very incredible. but not realizing that the self is still superimposed there and limiting the transcendence that one can see there. It's hard to get to there, but then when we go further, we have to understand no duality, no duality there. This is still the ignorance of the mind, but it's so deep seated. That's why we call it Niscient entrenchment from the Queen Shamala Lion's Roar Sutra. It's so deep seated, even in the moment prior to a realization, it obscures the true self nature of the mind. We're beginning to see it. It's like we're going to a concert, a band concert, and we can only hear the band from outside, but we haven't been allowed to go in. When we go in, we see the whole thing, but there's no we there at that moment. It is just the transcendence is that there's no we, because all the we are just mind, this single vehicle, no duality there. It's very, very important when we practice in this way. We talked about emptiness, and that the mind is unconditional. Anything that's conditioned, and I think Robert was one that which you got to wake up, Robert. He's meditating. It really struck him when I said anything that moves is conditional. Mind does not move. Mind moves in accordance with things, but it cannot move anywhere. Where is it going to abide? Everything is mind. So when we see this, it begins to present the samsaric world just as it is, not as how we try to explain it. We already talked about karuna. The Buddha nature was a major change in the practice, because the Buddha nature was something that came through the Tathagata Garbha Sutras and expanded beyond the notions in the Paramita Sutras of emptiness and this compassion, but it was pointing towards where this all was going. And again, tomorrow's lecture is going to be on someone who is asking the Buddha these specific questions, how this works. So it's very, very amazing. I wish I had the time to do that today, but in the later on, we will try to incorporate this into this class as well. We've talked about the esoteric and exoteric, and of Kasyap's twirling, and the idea that the teachings are not really teachings. They're a vehicle in which we can practice and set the stage for the true practice of contemplation, this application of contemplation and awareness in whatever we do. The practice, again, we've talked about with avirya, it has to be continuous. In the Mahaprajnaparamita Sutra, we talked about appearances, that appearances are illusory. And it's very interesting because in that sutra, which is much more expansive than the Heart Sutra, the Buddha goes into great depths about talking about appearances, and he's just telling the audience, calm down, don't be afraid, just calm down, and you'll see it. And because when you start reading something that says all appearances are empty, they're not real, and then all of a sudden you sense there is a crack in the ground, a fundamental instability to establish your own reality. It is what the Buddha is trying to get you to, is to shake that faith in the false illusion, in this Niscient entrenchment, this major ignorance that there is a life and being, a personality that's there. Break that down so this deconstruction of this world as is the transcendence. It doesn't mean that the world disappears. It just means that viewpoint that was an erroneous viewpoint is now right view. What is the right view? We understand all of these notions of ekayana, non-duality, sunyata, impermanence of anything. They all fit together. They're all just components and saying, this is mine. If you practice in this way, then you will be not far from it. It doesn't take that long if you practice in a very serious way, a sincere way, and really begin to go, I want to know more about this. I want to see how this fits. Because that delving deeper into the sutras is better. It's like somebody who goes to a diamond field and they just start scratching the surface and they just begin to scratch and then they might find some little diamond, something very impure. But so much more so that if one could dig into the ground and keep digging and digging and digging, the process of that digging makes the acquisition of that diamond irrelevant, because in that shedding of the personality or ego or life and being, one transcends the elements of Buddhist doctrine. It is in this way. If we cling to it, it will not work. Okay. Thank you again for allowing me to lecture and to listen. Please continue to practice. And thank you, Changhua. I really want to have this opportunity to pass on whatever I can before I pass on. So, well, actually, I'm not going to really pass on, but it may look that way. Okay. All right. I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you. So please, you can raise your hand and unmute to talk, or you can post your questions on the chat. Just before we start, I have a couple quick announcements. So I posted the Zoom link for tomorrow, Gilbert's class at 9:30, and he will be talking. The sutra is called the try. I have to find it. Sorry, Gilbert, can you remind us the teaching by the child inconceivable radiance.
Yeah, very interesting. It's such a wonderful sutra and a wonderful teaching tool. When I read it, I just went, this is so glorious to have something that for this year, what I've been teaching, to incorporate it all in one single sutra. And the story is absolutely incredible. I mean, it's just something where the Buddha runs across this one baby that is in a shack, and people were going in and talking to him. So then he goes in, and then this baby begins to ask him the questions. A lot of them kind of was the ones that Harry was asking me last week. So cause and condition never fail. Voila, this sutra appears, and I don't know if you had a chance, Harry, yet to look at that, but it's something that I think should answer your questions.
Thank you. And so
Thank you.
so we will continue the Sunday Dharma talk, English Dharma talk. Next week we will have starting a new series, and it's called the Introduction of the 100 Dharmas in Yogacara. And this series of lecture will be given by Changhua Fa Shi. So if you're interested in the conscious only school, please mark this, log on at the same time, Sunday, 11 a.m. And yeah, And please send your reflection to chancenter@gmail.com. So now, please, we will start getting. Please raise your hand for questions. So Michelle.
Oh, hi, Gilbert. First of all, I really appreciate, every time I enjoy and learning a lot from your Sunday morning class. Though I just started, I do learn a lot. And I'm glad, I will continue on the Monday night class to learn from you. In addition to that, earlier you mentioned the M&M. I think that was very interesting. Okay, I guess you mentioned Shifu put a lot of M&M in the bowl, and he just keep rolling, and then he smile, and then he ask you, what do you perceive, right? And I think the way you interpret each M&M is the 3 jewels. It's the collection wisdom of the 3 jewels. I think that was very wonderful, very great. And when you mentioned that, what come to in my mind is each M&M is the Dharma wisdom, and they all have a different color. So they all have a different Buddha's doctrine, the different Dharma. And why Shifu keep rolling? What it come to me is, though they are very highest, very precious wisdom, but we don't want to attach to it. So he keep rolling because we don't want to cling to it. Just as you mentioned earlier, if we cling to it, and then the wisdom is not going to work. Sometimes the red color works for that situation, but sometimes you have to, there you go, you have to pick the green color. In different situation, you have to apply the different Dharma. So you don't want to hold on to that. You don't want to attach to that. Use one color, one doctrine, one Dharma for every situation. So don't attach to it. You have to let it alive. Keep rolling. That's what comes to my mind. So just to share with you.
Almost there. Keep working on this. And one clarification which may help you in understanding this. Shifu didn't ask me anything with verbally. He just looked at me and I looked at him. It spoke volumes of Dharma in just a single second in this way. It just is this way, this mind-to-mind transmission that's there. So it's funny because sometimes I would talk to Shifu, we'd be alone and we'd be talking, and then I'd come out of it and go, wait a second, Shifu doesn't understand English. So I don't know what language we were talking about, but we were clear about what we were talking about. And so very interesting sometimes that it works this way, this kind of a transmission beyond beyond words and phrases. It just happens, and it's not something that makes me special. I offer this like the M&Ms to you, and because you picked up the M&Ms, it touched your heart. This is the way it works. Very, very good. This is how you do it. Okay. So I thank you for your comments and encourage you to go deeper and deeper because you're on the right path. Next question. No questions. I must have burned you guys out. Oh, here's one.
There's a question from Facebook. Alberto, any Spanish language sutras master can recommend? Spanish language sutras.
I don't know. I know that they have people, and Shifu has people, a Dharma Drum chapter in Mexico, but I don't know how many have come up in the Spanish language. It'd certainly be something. I imagine you'd probably have to Google it to find it. I do not know for about that. I'm sorry. But if you need it in Spanish, then by all means understand it in Spanish. This is very important. Zhao Min.
Gilbert, thank you for the teaching. Your teaching always have that teaching from the heart, always very touching me. And today you mentioned this mind to mind, that kind of connection. And then you mentioned let everything be and never been born. That part I didn't hear very clear. Would you explain more? Thank you.
We in our practice, one of the essence of the practice, even from the very, very beginning, is the idea that the birth and death, as I had mentioned before, you have to go through the two deaths, understanding the birth and death of a samsaric being, and the death of the notion of ego, personality, or life and being, which is a transcendence. That transcendence indicates that there is, all of this is a dream, just as it mentioned in the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra. In the Diamond Sutra, that when it talks about all that you should think of this fleeting world, and which is from there quoted in so many different treatises and even in other sutras of talking about that this world is a dream or an illusion, a phantasm, and equating it to a morning star or flash of lightning in a summer cloud, something that is just appears in a very, very short period of time, in terms of that we can, when we begin to see it in this way, we see that is something that is clearly unsupportable in terms of having some kind of an independent reality to it. And that is what we have to look at. And that is what in the Mahaprajnaparamita Sutra created such an uneasiness with people, because that's just where you're at, where you're looking at it and going, well, that you have a fear. What does this mean? Because you're coming from it from a nihilistic way, and you don't see the vast wealth, the incredible array of jewels that are arrayed before you. But so instead you pick up a rock and you try to hold on to the rock. Actually, I should say an analogy, not even a rock, a handful of sand, and you try to hold to it. And when we begin to see the fallacy of this, then the whole notion of an independent being existing, or a soul that transmigrates from one life to another, begins to break down. Once that's broken down, we have to fill it with something, not just simply with this nihilistic emptiness. We have to fill it with this interest in others, and realizing that all the suffering that arises from the world comes from our clinging to this illusory notion that this world is real.
So next question is from Robert.
Hi, Gilbert. I'm waiting. Amitabha. I'm going back to the M&M analogy. Well, the situation you mentioned. What appeared at the moment, it seems to be, it's like what you mentioned, Buddha was twirling a flower. He was like turning a flower, and I forgot the name of the
Mahakasyapa.
Mahakasyapa. He realized it's almost like the nature of, it's a selfless nature, just the nature is not self. It's like when you see any color, any flower, you don't say this is red or this is not red. Whatever color it is, it doesn't matter. It's just the flower. It's just the M&M. Whatever he was moving his finger, you're just seeing. You're seeing what you're seeing. You don't see anything else. You don't assign color, you don't assign beautiful, you don't assign taste, you don't assign a lot of dream of childhood, melting an M&M in your mouth. Nothing is attached to it. You're just seeing and knowing what's in front of you, what Sifu is doing. It's that, am I on the right track of understanding what Sifu is trying to do to you?
It's interesting because in that moment, there was not a disassociation with the samsaric realm. It was a communication coming from mind to mind within the samsaric realm, and the expression of very interesting. As he was moving them, he was looking at them like a child, and playing with them, just but very gently tapping them and rolling them, and just smiling, and people, they were just waiting for everything to start, but he was giving a lesson there, and it was from a different orientation. The lesson was from mine, but it was very interesting because the information was imprinted in his behavior, but it was more, there was more to it than just simply some monk just touching the M&Ms and rolling them, very gently with his finger. And again, he was very mindful just to use his fingernail, and especially in this day of COVID, nobody would want to eat any M&Ms. But the thing was, is that it was the childlike appearance that was given to say, as an offering, look at what mind is, that was what was special about it. So it defied, let's say, a description in a samsaric way. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to give you an analogy to it, but it was very, very clear information that was being given, like not from the perception of the five skandha, but this perception of mind, emanating from a more powerful source, an infinite source, but just very subtle, very, very beautiful. And that was what he was expressing by that, how important it was like that. Okay. Other question, Mark?
So we have a question from Ian, and next we will have Mark.
Okay.
Ian Scott, he posted on chat, he said, I have no interest in theories or ideologies. I am looking at is there an action in which the self is not? In daily life, no, not in nirvana. To find out an action that has no cause, no motive, an action which is not the result of a series of causes and effects. When one is trapped in cause and effect, one is in chains. Is there such an action? Can a mind that is burdened with knowledge see truth? Most minds are filled and crippled with knowledge in the sense of weighed down. Can such a mind perceive truth, or must it be free from knowledge, all knowledge?
For someone who wants to eschew doctrine, there's quite a bit of doctrine there. I think that you have to disgorge yourself from those kinds of approaches in terms of understanding it. And when we study this, we study it from the idea of right view. Most importantly, in right view is the understanding and acceptance of pratika samappada, causes and conditions never fail. We do not avoid samsaric circumstances. we understand that arises from mind, not anywhere but mind. And we are cognizant of what will happen in the next moment. But this idea of this is that we act in harmony through metta and karuna to see what we do next. In this way, we do not cogitate, we contemplate in the present moment. So what you're asking about is that the doctrine is necessary, and you have to learn the doctrine until you realize that I have nothing to teach. But you have to be honest about that. Don't just be arrogant about it or intellectual about it and say, well, none of this matters. It isn't in this way. What it is that we use this this practice in a way to harmonize within the samsaric realm, because that's our function. That's the function of mind. So when we practice in this way, we find the way to uplift humanity. We find the way to create a pure land here, and we make a great effort to do that. So when you see that, then you have to practice with the right view. So that's where I'd suggest you start is practicing first with right view and to harmonize. It's not about us at all. I mean, I'm a ghost, an illusion, a phantom, but there's nevertheless suffering of illusory sentient beings. But you have to figure out why. Why would you do this then? If you really have a strong question like that, then attend my class tomorrow night when those questions are asked. Okay.
Okay. Next is Mark.
Hi, Gilbert.
Hello, Mark.
For the last couple of weeks, you keep us very busy. Every time you teach us a new sutra, we're in a hurry to try to understand what's the content. But then you come to the question, because Shifu and the other Vowels also indicated we need to go deep before we go broad. Your sutra, I think every time we try to play the catch-up, but then we practice based upon your right view with a contemplation. My question now is, will we try to understand this new sutra in addition to like a Lotus Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, the Saragama? I mean, should we, how do we, my number one is, should we like follow your sutra path, try to really understand what you try to deliver, or should we like integrate it into our right view with a contemplation practice on that? Because, you know, every sutra which I study, it takes time. And also, sometimes this sutra is hard to understand in English. I'm trying to catch up. So how do I allocate the proper time between understand the sutra, integrate it to the right view, but in the meantime, I can perform the daily practice deeply? I'm trying to ask the question is, how do we coordinate between the go deep and go broad, but with the pace of your sutra?
Yeah, that's why this time around I emphasize by Pulya saying that each sutra of the Mahayana Sutras, like Lankavatara, Lotus Sutra, Diamond Sutra, Mahaprajna Paramita Sutras, the Tathagata Garbha Sutras, they all have the fundamental profoundness within them. There is I would say, you can pick a sutra as kind of an anchor point and then expand out from there. So as you listen to me, you see I bring in many treatises, many sutras, and they all are saying the same thing because they're via Pulya. They all are connected. And so you let your heart do that. But the more that you practice, the more you become exposed to other sutras. And you don't have to read the entire sutra, just get a taste for it. even get on Wikipedia and other places where they talk about it, get an understanding of how it fits, what its time frame is. That's why I talk about the history and the doctrine of Buddhism in particular this time around, Mahayana as applied to Chan Buddhism, and then the practice. So it's not just simply reading books or sutras and touching bases. It is the profoundness of your contemplation of what is being said. And that's why, like, tomorrow's is one where there's a lot of visuals in the sutra, and it helps you kind of put yourself there and feel what was happening. And it's very interesting just because it just keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper. Such an incredible sutra in that regard. But as you begin to read the sutras, you don't ever think that you've have really realized everything that sutra has to offer. A lot of things that are there are connected, as I'd mentioned before, from other sutras and from even schools of thought. That's why I brought out that about the mirror part in terms of Huang Po's teaching, because it was at that time when Huayan was weakening and Chan was getting stronger. So you see that it's rolled into it, and so you have a real understanding of what the practice is. If you do not have that time or interest, then you stay with one sutra and you practice. It's still fine. You can do that as well. The choice is up to you. You know, if you have a thirst for this, then you have to always be pushing yourself, you know, pushing yourself beyond what's there, and begin to practice. The more you practice, the more you will practice, just simply because there's this incredible thirst of putting this all together, not for the sake of your understanding, but for your sake of you explaining it to others. Then this is the karuna.
So I have a follow-up, Gilbert. So if I stick with my core practice, I follow your right view with contemplation, I am following the Suragama Sutra, then I will pick up whatever you teach us. I will try to either support or expand my core practice or the discipline. Would I be okay in my practice on that?
Oh, absolutely. And the Shurangama is an excellent one, because obviously everything is there. It's by Pool, yeah. I mean, everything is there that you need in terms of studying and of the practice. So that's a good home base, let's say. And then when you do that, then you see, okay, how is this? Where's the sutra in relationship historically with other sutras? When did it appear? You know, what are the translations of it? And you begin to look at it, you know, very sincerely. And the first time you read the Shurangama, you get a lot out of it. The next time you get a little bit, and then you're patient, and all of a sudden it just explodes. So it's a great sutra to work from. But to get to the exploding part, you have to really begin to sincerely see what the fundamental elements that are being taught there are, and to contemplate them. This is very, very important. In any sutra, you have to contemplate it. You can't just read words, you know. You have to say, what does that mean? Try to picture yourself in the situation. If it's talking about the Buddha talking to somebody, how was that? Especially, let's say in the Shurangama Sutra, and who was Ananda was there, and he's lying on the Matangi mat, and you go, how did he do that? Ananda was like the Buddha's big disciple. Now he's lying on the mat of a prostitute, an unclean mat. And how did he get there? And what happened? What was his weakness? So you try to feel that. You see it with your own eyes, your own imagination, what was happening. And then you can feel the emotions of that. And you can feel how the Buddha was able to perceive that. How can Buddha perceive that? Not with a samsaric consciousness, but with mind. And then you begin to see how powerful the mind is. Okay, so this is how you approach it.
Thank you, Gilbert. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So we have a question from Simon. is there a way to non-attached instantaneously? For example, with physical comfort and safety?
Yeah, it's actually a good question, and it did me very well earlier in this year when I was in great pain. And you just simply see things as impermanent. This is very important. It will pass. You see that in the nature of arising of these kinds of sensations, and you understand if you have a physical problem, that the pain is coming from the body telling you something's wrong. But after you do it, it's just like a fire bell. So once you hear the fire bell, then you just disengage it. Doesn't mean that the pain is not there. The pain is still there, but the suffering from the pain is not. And so you understand where the suffering comes from. The pain is a physical sensation. It's impermanent. It will pass. But as one begins to do that, then you can sit in meditation for a long period of time, just simply contemplating, and in that way, you can see that these things are not real. That's an easy way to do it, I would say, but it requires quite a bit of effort. But if you wanted to remove the suffering, but understand that this too is something that you can pass on to other people, is not so valuable just simply because you can accomplish that. But if you can show other people that what they're suffering from is an illusion, and that therein lies the skill, because one has to be able to understand how to do that. You cannot tell somebody who has just lost a loved one that don't worry, everything's impermanent, so nothing's real. They would think that you were a very cruel person. So you have to understand how to use your wisdom to help people with suffering. I had a cousin that had lost her son because he was shot by another person, so it was taken away from her very quickly, and she was suffering for months, and they told me about this, and so she was crying and crying. So when I called her and talked to her about this, she was crying, and she said, and the people are telling me not to cry. And I go, who can tell a mother when to stop crying for her son? And just that listening from the heart allowed her to stop crying, because somebody said it's okay to cry. But by saying it's okay to cry, she didn't have to cry anymore, because she understood that this was something from her heart as a mother. And so she was able to do this. So instead of saying to her, don't cry, I said, why not cry? It's natural. So when we see the things, we use our heart to help others with the suffering. If we can remove our suffering, then we can remove the suffering of other people as well. So this is how you practice.
Is there any more questions? And so from Changhua Fashi Post, CMC will invite Gilbert again in the near future. Thank you all. We appreciate your teachings. And Fashi, do you have anything to add? I think we're good.
Okay.
So thank you all. Yeah.
And people who were saying things about private messages, I don't know how to access them. I'll try to find out if there's some way to access them on my side, because I see that all the time. But once I close up, then I don't see anything. So if you do want to send me messages too, you can send them to the Mind Work and ask the questions there, and that's probably the best way. But I'll see if I can access it, but I don't know if I can or not. Okay. Thank you again. We'll see you soon. No, we'll do this again. Omitofo.
Thank you, Gilbert. Everyone,
Thank you,
please join
Gilbert.
home and bow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gilbert.
Thank you,
Thank
Gilbert.
you, Gilbert. Thank you,
Gilbert.
Omitofo.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Gilbert. Thank you.
Gilbert.